What if everything you thought about Hollywood's most iconic couple wasn't the full story? Picture this: a whirlwind romance, flashbulbs lighting up red carpets, two of the most magnetic young stars of the early 90s wrapped in each other's arms, and the whole world watching. That was Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder. To fans, they weren't just dating, they were poetry in motion. It was the kind of love that made people believe in soulmates. They starred together in Edward Scissorhands, looking like they stepped out of a gothic fairy tale. And when Johnny got Winona Forever tattooed on his arm, game over. Everyone thought it was destiny, but destiny, as it turns out, can be a little more complicated than it looks in black and white photographs. Fast forward to 2025. Winona Ryder, now 53 and largely known for her thoughtful privacy and graceful silence, over the years has just opened up about that chapter of her life. And what she said about Johnny Depp's behavior, especially in light of everything that's happened to him publicly, has everyone doing a double take. Here's the twist. Her words weren't bitter. They weren't angry. In fact, they were something much more powerful. She defended him. At a time when it's so easy, almost expected, to pile on public figures during moments of scandal, Winona's voice cut through like a whisper that stopped. The noise. Let's rewind a bit. Back to 1989. Johnny was 26. Winona, just 17. They met at the premiere of Great Balls of Fire. And legend has it, they locked eyes near a vending machine. In that split second, something clicked. Johnny would later describe it as love at first sight. It was a classic glance, he told Rolling Stone, like the zoom lenses in West. Side story, and everything else gets foggy. That's not just infatuation, that's cinematic-level chemistry. Their relationship escalated fast. Within months, they were Hollywood's golden couple. They co-starred in Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands, a film that not only showcased their talent but cemented their place in pop culture history. But behind the glamour, it was also Winona's first serious relationship. And it was overwhelming. She was navigating fame, identity, and love all at once. And Johnny? He was balancing a wild career trajectory with the increasing pressure of being half of a cultural obsession. For 4 years, they were inseparable. Johnny was reportedly protective, romantic, and wildly expressive. Think handwritten poems, spontaneous getaways, declarations of eternal love. The kind of gestures most people only dream about. And yet, even with all that intensity, the relationship wasn't immune to the pressure cooker of Hollywood, the media scrutiny, the rumors, the jealousy, the chaos that comes with being young, famous, and constantly under a microscope. Eventually, it all became too much. In 1993, the pair broke off their engagement, and Johnny, in a move that fans have never forgotten, changed his Winona Forever tattoo to Wino Forever. A single letter gone, and the romance with it. Now, here's where the story takes a turn. For decades, Winona said very little about their breakup. No tell-alls, no interviews, nothing. In an industry where silence is rare and juicy revelations are currency, her restraint stood out. It was as if she had taken a vow to protect that part of her life. Some chalked it up to heartbreak. Others called it class. Maybe it was both. But silence doesn't mean there wasn't pain. Winona has admitted in the past that the end of their relationship nearly destroyed her. She was young, raw, and overwhelmed. "It was my first heartbreak," she said. "I think it was really hard for me to get out of bed in the morning. I had never been through anything like that." At one point, she described curling up on the floor, unable to function, a dark chapter that left a lasting imprint on her soul. For anyone who's ever experienced that kind of heartbreak, her words resonate on a deeply human level. Still, she never blamed Johnny, never villainized him, never painted herself as a victim. She just disappeared from that narrative. Until... Now, in a recent interview, one of the few times she's publicly addressed Johnny since their breakup, Winona finally broke her silence. But instead of bitterness, she offered clarity. She said, "I truly and honestly only know him as a really good, loving, caring guy. He was very, very protective of me. Then she added something that stopped people in their tracks. He was never that way to me, never abusive at all. That last sentence matters, because in the age of viral accusations, courtroom battles, and public opinion swinging like a pendulum, her words offer a rare, grounded perspective. She's not saying she knows every version of Johnny Depp. She's not commenting on every headline. She's simply sharing what she lived, what she felt, and what she remembers. Let's pause and think about that. Imagine someone asking you to speak on a person you haven't dated in over 30 years, to judge them based on rumors or reports from decades later. Could you? Would you? Winona chose her words carefully. She made it clear that she wasn't invalidating anyone else's experience. She said, "I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I'm not calling anyone a liar. I'm just telling you the Johnny I knew was a gentle, kind soul." That level of maturity? It's rare and powerful. But let's be honest, her comments hit differently because of timing. Johnny Depp has been through the ringer in recent years, from a highly publicized defamation trial with ex-wife Amber Heard to losing major movie roles to becoming a lightning rod for debates about cancel culture, domestic abuse, and the court. Of public opinion, his legacy has been questioned like never before, and then quietly, Winona Ryder speaks. Not with a press conference or dramatic monologue, just a few heartfelt sentences in a quiet interview, and suddenly, the world remembers. There's more to this man than what headlines scream. There's more to this story than courtroom transcripts and gossip blogs. Here's another layer. Winona has had her own share of struggles. In the early 2000s, she was arrested for shoplifting, a moment that nearly ended her career. She stepped away from Hollywood, took a long break, and when she returned, it wasn't with a vengeance, but with humility. Her comeback with Stranger Things was a masterclass in resilience. She rebuilt her career with integrity, not scandal. So, when she speaks, especially now at 53 with decades of reflection under her belt, it's not to gain attention. It's not to stir drama. It's to tell the truth as she lived it. And that's what makes her words so compelling. We live in a world where opinions are often formed in 280 characters or less. A single tweet, a soundbite, or a viral video clip can determine someone's legacy, can crown a hero, or condemn a villain in seconds. Social media, for all its connectivity and democratization of voices, has turned public discourse into a race to the fastest judgment. People rarely wait for the whole story anymore. We scroll, we skim, we share. And in the process, nuance, the human complexity that lives in the gray areas, is lost. Reputations are flattened. Context is stripped away. People become hashtags instead of human beings, and in this frenzied climate of instant takes and hot-button reactions, algorithms do what they're built to do. They amplify outrage. The more inflammatory the content, the more it spreads. Platforms reward engagement, not accuracy, not fairness, not humanity. It's not just what's being said, it's how loudly and how emotionally it's said. Empathy struggles to compete with virality. And within that system, real people, with real histories, contradictions, and emotional scars, get reduced to caricatures. Johnny Depp, in many ways, became a prime example of that phenomenon. For years, Depp wasn't just an actor. He was a symbol, a rebel, a heartthrob, a misfit genius who defied Hollywood norms. His roles, from Edward Scissorhands to Jack Sparrow, etched him into pop culture in ways few actors have ever achieved. But once his personal life became public property, all that history, all that goodwill was suddenly put on trial. Not just in court, but in the digital town square. Overnight, he went from beloved to polarizing, and then, depending on which narrative you followed, either a victim of false accusations or a man finally being held accountable. The court case with Amber Heard wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a global spectacle. Every clip from the courtroom was dissected online. Memes, commentary, side-by-side breakdowns of facial expressions and body language. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about entertainment. People took sides like it was a sports match. Justice for Johnny and thus, I believe, Amber became digital battlegrounds. But what was lost in that battle of narratives was the truth that people are complicated. That trauma isn't always easy to categorize, that not every relationship has a single villain and a single victim, and that real life doesn't play out like a screenplay with neat character arcs. Then, out of that chaos came Winona Ryder, someone who had known Johnny at a very different time in his life, before the scandals, before the lawsuits, before the career fallout. Her voice, quiet and unassuming, pierced through the noise like a gentle but unmistakable reminder. When she said, "I truly and honestly only know him as a really good, loving, caring guy," it wasn't a dramatic defense, it wasn't a rebuttal. Aimed at headlines, it was simply her truth, and that truth is not insignificant. Because when someone speaks from lived experience, not speculation, not second-hand knowledge, but actual memory, it deserves to be considered. Especially when that person, like Winona, has nothing to gain. She isn't promoting a project, she isn't angling for attention, she's notoriously private, and throughout her career she's chosen dignity over drama time and again. That makes her words all the more credible. But of course, her words don't erase everything that's come to light. They don't cancel out other voices or invalidate other experiences, and she doesn't pretend they do. In fact, Winona was careful to acknowledge that. She explicitly said she wasn't there for the events in question, that she couldn't speak to what may or may not have happened later in Johnny's life. She wasn't trying to write a revisionist history. What she was doing, and what few people dare to do anymore, was offering her own honest account while leaving space for other truths to coexist. That level of maturity, that willingness to live in ambiguity is rare. Because ambiguity is uncomfortable. It doesn't fit neatly into a tweet. It doesn't drive traffic. It requires patience and empathy and, above all, a willingness to accept that the people we think we know, especially public figures, are never just one thing. They are layered. They evolve. They make mistakes. They grow. And they are often remembered more for their worst moment than for their best. Winona's words serve as a powerful counterweight to that. She reminded the world of the man she knew in 1990, not as a headline, not as a defendant, not as a figure trapped in endless legal drama or viral controversy, but as a young actor navigating fame with raw vulnerability and a fiercely romantic heart. He wasn't the tabloid persona. He wasn't the courtroom spectacle. He was to her just Johnny, a man who loved deeply, who felt everything intensely, and who gave more of himself than most people ever knew. At the peak of their relationship, the two of them were not just a couple, they were inseparable. They became a cultural phenomenon often referred to as Hollywood's last great love story of the pre-social media age. Paparazzi couldn't get enough of them, and fans idolized the pair like characters out of a dream. But what was happening? Behind closed doors wasn't just some surface-level fairy tale. According to Winona, it was a love story marked by tenderness, passion, and depth. Johnny was someone who paid attention to her, someone who listened when no one else did, someone who saw through her shyness and brought out the parts of her that even she didn't fully understand yet. She recalls him writing her poems, not as a grand gesture for publicity, but quietly, intimately, just for her. Words scrawled in ink, meant only to make her feel seen. In a world where so many actors craft personas, where affection often comes wrapped in performance, Johnny was different. He wasn't trying to impress the world when he was with her. He was just present, and that presence, for Winona, was grounding. He knew her fears and stayed up with her when she couldn't sleep. He held her through panic attacks and moments of emotional fragility, not out of obligation, but because that's who he was to her, a protector, a partner, a man who truly cared. She has said that the time they shared was one of the most meaningful of her life. It wasn't perfect. They were both young, both still figuring out who they were in the spotlight. But it was honest. It was real. And it left a permanent mark on her. Even after their breakup, even after the tattoo turned from Winona Forever to Wino Forever, the affection in her voice when she speaks about him never quite faded. She didn't speak with bitterness or regret, only with the kind of wistful clarity that comes from looking back at a chapter of your life that shaped you. To her, Johnny wasn't the volatile man painted in legal documents decades later. He was the boy who defended her in interviews when critics doubted her talent, who once told the press that meeting her was like love at first sight. She remembers a man who made her laugh when she felt lost, who would look at her like she was the only person in the room. There were no scandals between them, no lawsuits, no public betrayals. What ended their relationship wasn't malice, but the pressures of fame and youth, forces that few couples survive, especially under a relentless spotlight. And that version of Johnny Depp may not align with the stories that dominate headlines today, but it existed. It was real. It wasn't a defense or a justification. It was a memory, a lived experience, a truth that deserves space alongside the rest. In this climate, where people are often judged solely by their worst moments or harshest critics, Winona's perspective adds a rare layer of humanity. She isn't asking anyone to rewrite history. She's simply reminding us that the story of a person's life is rarely one-dimensional, that behind every scandal is a fuller, more complicated person, and sometimes the version of them we don't see matters just as much as the one we do. Maybe the truth isn't singular. Maybe it's mosaic, built from many perspectives, not just the loudest ones. Winona's voice may not be definitive, but it is essential, because in telling her truth, she doesn't excuse everything. She simply reminds us that Johnny Depp, like everyone else, cannot be defined by a single chapter of his life. That the people we cancel, exalt, demonize, or idolize are all more than what we see on screen, whether that screen is a movie theater or a phone. In some ways, her statement was as much about humanity as it was about Johnny. It was a quiet act of compassion in a culture that often forgets what compassion looks like, and maybe, just maybe, it challenges us to hold off before casting judgment, to pause before hitting retweet, to remember that there's always more to the story, because what we saw in Winona's words wasn't just nostalgia or loyalty, it was a mature reflection from someone who's lived, lost, and come out the other side with grace. She didn't try to redeem Johnny. She didn't try to explain him. She simply acknowledged that at one point in time he was kind, he was loving, and he was not the monster the world sometimes imagines. Maybe that version of Johnny doesn't erase the rest. But maybe it's still worth hearing, because it's a reminder that no person should be reduced to their worst day, and that even in a world addicted to quick takes, the quiet voices still matter. So now, we turn it over to you. Does hearing Winona Ryder's perspective change how you see Johnny Depp? Does it make you reconsider how quickly we form opinions? Or maybe it just reminds you of your own first heartbreak, and how the people we loved at our most vulnerable leave marks. We never forget. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think it's possible to separate who someone was from who they are now? Can you hold space for conflicting truths? And if this video gave you a fresh perspective, we have a full deep dive on Johnny Depp's journey, from teen idol to controversial figure to what may be his quietest chapter yet. It's a ride you won't want to miss. While you're here, hit that like button, subscribe for more real stories told with empathy, and ring that bell so you're always the first to hear the truth, not just the noise. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't shouted, they're whispered, and when someone like Winona Ryder finally speaks, it's worth listening. Thanks for watching. Stay thoughtful, stay open, and as always, stay kind.